The UK has been plagued by strikes for some time now. The common theme, higher pay to keep in pace with inflation. The latest, postal worker walkouts coinciding with the busiest time of the year, Christmas. But the pace of the strikes and its range over different sectors is worsening the inflation-hit UK economy. In this edition of The Spotlight, we will look at the dire economic situation of the UK and how the government of Rishi Sunak is trying to deal with it. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. Muslim Abbas joins us. He's a journalist and political commentator from London. Also joining us is Farah Hughes, journalist, author, and activist from Belfast. Welcome to you both. Muslim Abbas, I will start first with you. Taking a look at the strikes that are happening, obviously a strike is never a good time for it to occur, but this one is surely coming at a time when it's going to affect lots of things. This latest one being by the postal workers. Why is the UK experiencing so many strikes, however, all kind of give or take at the same time?
Essentially because there's been a kind of comedy of disasters instigated by government after government for many years, but more short term, I suppose one could put these things down to things like COVID lockdown, the rising oil prices, the worst cost push inflation since 1970s. More longer term, I suppose, if you looked at the Brexit situation, the general poor productivity of Britain, and the decline in competitiveness with a lot of the major trading partners that Britain has. All of this, along with lack of investment in technology, these are standard reasons given by people who say that's why Britain is in the condition it is. But to be fair, it's over the last 13 years. If you just take note of the fact that the actual rise in wages has been essentially less than 1%, and yet if you looked at price rises and the general cost of living, that's of course shot through the roof. So there's been no parity. So it's no wonder that finally Britain has woken up to the fact that actually they've been mugged by this government, which has been causing economic disasters, whether you'd say those were by accident or whether they were stupidity or whether they were actually engineered and deliberately synchronized. That's something we could explore perhaps as we go along.
Yes, there's lots to explore. I'm not too sure if our 25 minutes is going to be able to cover that. Now, let me ask you this, Farah Hughes. I'm taking a look at two angles here. One is how, for example, Andrew Griffith MP has said these railway strikes are going to keep families apart. They will cost the UK businesses, put pressure on roads, cancel hospital visits, and it will obviously contribute to missed school days. But isn't the bigger picture something that's so much more worse, that it needs any type of action, strikes being one of it, in order to elevate the seriousness of the matter that the UK is dealing in terms of its economy? And basically, at the core of it, at least one of them, is the fact that you're dealing with inflation, of which incomes are not keeping up with it. And so you need something in order to put a check on the government in order for it to do something.
Yes, well, I think the first thing to bear in mind is that people never strike as a first resort. Striking by workers is a last resort. It's a sign of desperation. It's a sign of failure in the kind of arbitration talks between the trade union movement and either the government and or their private employers, whoever is the kind of governing body in employing this particular group or profession. I think if you just... like a very good microcosm of all this would be the fact that the Royal College of Nursing is striking for the first time in its 100-year history. Now, that speaks volumes for people who train and dedicate their lives, their time, their energy, and their empathy to help people who are suffering, to help people who are in need, to save lives, and indeed to deliver lives in the maternity units, and to help people, unfortunately, at end of life, maybe through palliative care. So we're talking about a group of professionals who would be seen to be among the most kind of emotionally invested people in society, saying we have had enough, we have been left with no choice, we must go out on strike. And when we consider how many people died during COVID, on the front line as members of the health service. That's not just nurses, that's doctors, that's porters, that's theatre technicians, that's x-ray radiologists, that's the whole spectrum within the health service. And we were asked to clap them on a Thursday night for 10 minutes, and they were seen to be the heroes of the NHS in the war against COVID. And now that that war has been won, or perhaps we have seen COVID in its real light for what it really was, now those people are being asked to take a 4% pay raise, which in reality is a 16% pay cut when we look at inflation running at over 11%. And for people to have a pay raise in line with inflation, and actually a pay raise is when you have more money this year than you did last year, that pay raise should be in and around 19%. And one major barometer of society and its ills is homelessness. And I looked earlier, and depending which statistics you follow, there are between 480 and 1,270 registered homeless people died in England and Wales last year. And according to the big issue, that is one homeless person died every 7 hours. So this is the failure of the government. The homelessness is a barometer of the economic situations, and I feel things will only get worse. And I would personally like to see a general strike by all workers in the United Kingdom to bring the government to its senses and to pay people a fair day's wage for a fair day's work.
Yeah, there's really no great economic news coming day in and day out practically. I don't want to exaggerate here, Seamus and Abbas. But taking a look at wages now, because again, we need to lay out all the different stats in order to get the gravity of the situation, how severe it is. One of them is the fact that you have the wages and that situation in which, from what I'm looking at over here, the average pay rise for workers in the private sector, it came in at just 6.9% between August and October, of which this particular source says that compares to wage growth of just 2.7% for public sector employees, 2.7%. And then you have this headline, and I have to put this next to each other since we don't have that much time, is the fact that you have, this was the Daily Mail that came out with this, where you have the wages to have fallen 3.9%, the fastest rate in 13 years, based on the cost of living crisis. So again, more bad news. I think the only positive news is that inflation was 11.2% and it came down to 10.9%. I think that was the only positive economic news that I saw. So basically, again, we're looking at income not keeping up with inflation, and even worse, in this case, if wages to have dropped. What's your understanding of the way that this wage scenario is working out now?
Well, there's been of course, a leaning towards corporate power in Britain ever since Margaret Thatcher, and since she brought in the kind of the power of the corporates and broke essentially the trades unions, the bargaining power of the ordinary worker has been reduced. And of course, with this globalization business, what partly was happening was that, if workers, for instance, here in Britain, or if they were in Germany, with the industrialized nations or the technologically advanced nations, if they were to, if their workers would say, no, we don't want to do this and we're going to strike and demand more wages, they would say, okay, fine, our corporations are shifting this business, we're taking it off to China, we're going to do an exodus. And that would, of course, then scare the trades unions, and it would also mean that they didn't push the demands for wages too much. That's been one of the major factors. It's this globalization of industry, which allows these corporations to basically shift their business wherever they like. And of course, that's weakened trades unions and the power of the ordinary worker. That hasn't changed, although what's happened with Brexit is interesting, because Britain not only left the EU, they left the single market, they left the custom union, and that it said has accounted for something like 50% reduction of the UK trade overall. And these are all, I suppose, factors which lead to a perfect storm, which has also been consolidated more recently by Britain's ridiculous backing of the Americans in the war in Ukraine against Russia. The truth of the matter is that has been another nail in their own coffins, because, of course, the energy crisis has kicked in, and that's another reason for rising oil prices, which has created the worst cost-push inflation since the 1970s. So nothing was going to really go up in terms of these wages, and at the same time, they've been pumping prices up long before even Brexit happened. Things were rising on the shelves anyway, but people kind of were forced to tolerate it. Now, of course, it's got to sort of breaking point. People can feel that the winter is coming in, this threat of supply lines, supply chains for food, the threat of the energy prices going through the roof, and general insecurity is now making people belatedly react. Whether it's too little, too late, we're not sure, but certainly, there is a huge problem on the horizon.
Okay. Again, I'm trying to lay the foundation here, and I need, as much as is in your ability, both of you, to make us understand, since you are at least in that part of the world, as to how bad the situation is. And Fra Hughes, this particular piece of stat, the source being the New Economics Foundation, I have to mention it because, honestly, there's so many sources out there, and some of them just don't match up. And I don't want to exaggerate, nor do I want to basically misquote facts, or misrepresent is the word I'm looking for. But this particular one says that projected increases in unemployment would result, based on rising prices or inflation, it would result in 43% of households lacking the resources to put food on the table, buy new clothes, or treat themselves and their families. Now, that's almost half from what I'm understanding here. And then what's worse is that it says it's a 12 percentage point rise compared with 2019. So in 2019, I mean, if my math is correct, you're looking at 31% of households. Now, it was bad, and now it's gotten worse. And that's close to half of households. Do you agree with this stat, first of all? Is it that bad?
Well, I'm going to assume it is, because, I mean, the first thing a government does is manipulate the facts. I mean, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think the problem with governmental statistics are they are all massaged for public consumption. So let's assume it's true for starters. I mean, we are all aware of the anecdotal evidence of kids going to school hungry. I mean, with lots and lots of breakfast clubs now where I live in the schools, and actually some private kind of cafes in the morning offering kids breakfast on their way to school. More and more food banks are prevalent, and I see again like anecdotal things, like people put up we have a small petrol station, and we're leaving out 20 litre drums of home heating oil for whoever needs it. Just turn up, take the heating oil, take it home, put it in your tank. It's not a lot, but it might do people for a few days in a very, very, very cold snap of weather, and bring back the empty container, and it'll be filled up again. So there's almost like a seesaw between the people in desperate need and those that are in society who are trying to help, who are actually stepping in to the governmental role. The government should be there if we believe in the basic wage. The idea of the basic wage, it's not a living wage. It's not so people can afford cars or go on holiday or have luxuries. The basic wage is supposed to enable every household within the United Kingdom to live above the poverty line. Also, you have state subsidies in the form of unemployment benefit and universal credit and other home kind of income support finances to prevent all this from happening. And yet, the mortality rate for children is going up, and the life expectancy for adults is going down, and more and more children are falling into the poverty trap. So there's relative poverty and there's absolute poverty, and what you're alluding to is 40% or plus of families and homes and communities and society at large are struggling to meet the basic needs of putting food on the table, putting clothes on the backs of their children, and putting heat and electricity and oil and gas into their homes. And that's why we're seeing these strikes. That's why we're seeing people at the end of their tether. And that's why, if I was a trade union leader, I'd be calling for a general strike.
Well, there's no denying it, and I'm hoping that I'm correct in this, Said Mohsen Abbas. When you take a look at, and we have to take COVID in the context of things, at least for you to do that for us. But there's no denying the fact that before the Ukraine conflict broke out, things didn't look as bad as they are right now. And I'm saying that, of course, your input here is more valuable than whatever I think. I'm putting this, I'm addressing this to you, given the fact that when you take a look at the aid that Ukraine has received, of which out of the 93.8 billion pounds, or euros, I must say, half came from the States, 29.2 billion euros from the European Union, and it says 12.3 billion euros came from other countries, mostly the United Kingdom. So put that into context for us if you can.
I think the context is fairly obvious from the statistics, and I don't doubt those statistics at all. The British government has embarked on absolutely self-destructive economic policies for such a long time now, not for the rich, I might add, because of course, if you were to look up the billionaires index and their profits, they have been rising disproportionately, even in COVID. In fact, there are those of us who argue that basically all of these policies that the British government have, instigated or instituted could only be done by absolute saboteurs or traitors to this country, or by complete idiots. The reality of the matter is you send money abroad to a war which you have no profit or gain from, against the main provider of your oil and gas and perhaps even wheat and such like products. At the same time, you've done no investment in building your own energy capabilities. You've done nothing to really try and compensate from pulling out of Brexit, which was a major disaster, the way it was done and the speed at which it was done and the manner of it. There was nothing in place in terms of building British trade alliances globally in that short space of time. It couldn't be done. And, the main trading partners around Europe, of course, are the first ones who dropped their kind of connections, and there's huge issues surrounding virtually every aspect of that Brexit exit. So COVID and Brexit as a combination, without a doubt, have given Britain a huge hammering. But these were all political decisions. They weren't done in ignorance. The government lied openly and barefacedly. Boris Johnson lied openly during Brexit about how they were going to benefit the NHS and how many billions they were going to be able to save by pulling out of the EU. They were just absolute barefaced lies. And the chicken is going to come home to roost, and it already is. It hasn't even, I think, begun. I think it's going to get a lot worse than it is already. And in a way, this is a political set of blunders. But I would say that the Corporation of London and the people sitting in in the Bank of England, the people sitting in the Square Mile, the people sitting in Westminster, for me, there seems to be this kind of gross negligence or even collusion to bring Britain to its knees. It was completely unnecessary. It was totally avoidable. You can't blame it on the global downturn all the time. It is also down to the policies that they've deliberately rolled out. They won't affect the elite and the rich. The rich will continue getting richer, but it's the ordinary workers that have indeed on the ground started suffering to the extent where poverty, areas like Burnley, which we've covered before, I think, on the program, where their people are falling below the poverty line, and children are going without lunches, and there will be all sorts of cost cutting. And for a nation which was meant to be the sixth biggest economy in the world, this is an absolute travesty for a nation of this kind of power and economic, muscle to be in a state where it's now literally got its population begging for handouts. Food banks all across the country are booming. People are desperately, many people are desperately going and relying on food banks. So it's not a lie. There is a huge problem caused by the arrogance and the elitism, and perhaps also the coordination with the Great Reset of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. These governments are hand in glove with a much bigger global agenda to really bring populations to heal and to make people feel like they have to have gratitude for what they're given, even the meager morsels that they're given.
I knew we don't have enough time to cover all the topics. I just have a minute to give to you. And this is really what's shocking here, Frau Hughes. Bank of England, the portfolio is reading £200 billion in the red after UK rout. I don't know if you read this piece of news. Very recent. Now, I don't know what this means exactly as to how you can have the Bank of England be that much in the red. But obviously, the bank, along with the people who are wealthy, something's going on there, which the ordinary people are suffering from what we're looking at in the UK. What needs to be done by Rishi Sunak? I think the best he's had to offer so far, trying to come up with £50 billion in what, tax revenues? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, I think that was seen to be the black hole that was in the financial budget that he was trying to reconnect with. I think we really just have to be honest, and we'll have to be truthful, and we'll have to view reality as it is. The governments and the elite are living in a bubble. They have never cared for working class people. From Margaret Thatcher, we have had nothing but austerity for the guts of 40 years. Rishi Sunak's recent, or Jeremy Hunt's recent budget proves that they are only concerned with putting profit before people, putting the profits of the companies before the welfare of the people. The little people don't matter. The little people, many of them have got to the point now where they no longer even vote. And those who vote sometimes are voting along racist, discriminatory, kind of law and order issues instead of facing up to the reality that until there is a government that is there for the people, then we will continue to drift listlessly into that long good night.
Thank you for that. Sorry to be such a sour note, but we have to deal with reality, and we appreciate both of you, Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, journalist and political commentator, and Frau Hughes, thank you, journalist, author, and activist. And with that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight. From Yukaba Tapwe and the team, it's goodbye.